frozen glove banged 3 times on the kitchen door, then 4 times harder. The wind pushed snow sideways across the porch, and a row of headlights burned through the white. Boots stomped on the steps. A man's voice shouted over the storm, asking if anyone was still alive in the house. A second voice lower told him to try the barn. The old woman pressed her hand to the glass and saw leather jackets caked in ice. She saw beards crusted white. She counted the bikes lined along her fence and stopped counting at 30. Her late husband's coat still hung by the door. She reached for it without thinking. Her name was Maren Lockwood, and in 11 days the bank was taking everything she owned. She did not know that yet, not the 11 days part. Why did she open the door anyway? Stay with me on this one. She unbolted the door, and the cold hit her like a slap. The big man on the porch took one step back to give her room, which surprised her. He had a beard down to his chest, and a patch on his jacket she did not recognize. Behind him, 4 more men stood in the snow, helmets under their arms, breath steaming in the porch light. The road was gone. The county had not plowed since noon, and dusk was coming down hard. He told her his crew got caught between 2 closed passes. He said they had one woman riding with them who could not feel her hands anymore. He asked, very polite, if there was any building on the property they could shelter the bikes in for the night. He said they had cash. He said they would pay her whatever she asked. Maren looked past him at the line of headlights stretching down her gravel drive and out onto the county road. She could not see the end of it. 40 bikes. Maybe 50. Maybe more behind those. She thought about the empty stalls in the barn where her husband's 2 quarter horses used to live before she sold them last spring. She thought about the freezer in the mudroom with the last of the venison her neighbor had given her in November. She thought about how quiet that barn had been since Tom died. She thought about the propane tank gauge reading a quarter full. She thought about the heating bill on the fridge held up by a magnet shaped like a horseshoe. She thought about her husband stomping his boots clean on the porch on a night like this 30 years ago, hauling in armfuls of split oak, telling her a closed door in a storm was a sin in any country worth living in. She heard him say it almost out loud. She heard him say, "You let people in, Maren. You always let people in. That is the part of you I married." She told the big man to bring them in. All of them. He blinked. He had been ready to argue, ready to negotiate. He had not been ready for that. He nodded once, the way men nod when they are trying not to show something on their face, and turned and waved his arm down the line. Engines started rolling, slow, careful, one at a time up the slick drive. She put on her husband's coat. She found the barn keys in the bowl by the door. She walked out into the storm with a stranger and his frozen riders, and she pushed the big sliding door open on tracks that had not moved since October. The barn smelled like old hay and motor oil. A pair of mice scattered. There was a wood stove against the back wall, dead since spring. There was a hand pump that still worked if you primed it right. There were 2 horse stalls on the right side with the gates wired shut, and a tack room at the back with a saddle her husband had used since the year before they were married. The bikes came in 2 at a time. The men peeled off frozen gloves and slapped their hands against their own chests to get the blood moving again. The woman who could not feel her fingers was led to a corner where the big man sat her down on a bale of straw and pulled her wet boots off himself. He rubbed her feet through her socks until color came back into them, the way you would rub a child's feet, no embarrassment in it on either side. Maren went back to the house. She came back with an armful of old wool blankets, 3 thermoses of coffee she made on the propane stove, and the last of her husband's bottle of bourbon. She set it all on the workbench and told them to help themselves. The big man watched her. He asked her name. She told him. He told her his name was Rooster, and that the others called him President, and that she had just saved 12 people from a hospital trip or worse. She waved him off. She said she had a wood pile out back that needed splitting if anyone felt useful. 3 men were already on their feet before she finished the sentence. By the time full dark came down, her barn had become something she had not seen in 2 years. It had become a room with people in it. The stove was lit. The chimney drew. The coffee was gone, and a second pot was on. A long red-haired writer was patching a torn glove with dental floss and a needle. A pair of younger men were arm wrestling on an overturned grain bin and losing badly to a woman in her 60s with arms like fence posts. Someone had a small Bluetooth speaker playing old country songs at low volume. Marin stood in the doorway holding her husband's coat closed at the throat, and she felt, for the first time since the funeral, that the building was no longer holding its breath. Rooster came over to her. He held out a folded stack of bills. He said it was what they had. He said it was not enough for what she had done, but it was the start. She looked at the money and shook her head. She told him her barn had been empty for a long time. She told him she did not want money for letting the building do what a building is supposed to do. He stared at her a long second. Then he put the bills back in his pocket without arguing, which is not a thing men like him are known to do. That night she fed them. She emptied the freezer. She thawed the venison and pulled the last bag of frozen corn and 3 cans of tomatoes off the shelf and made a stew big enough for the lot of them in the cast iron pot her grandmother had used during the Depression. She baked 4 pans of biscuits. She did not have flour for a 5th. She did not have flour for the rest of the week either, but that was a problem for the rest of the week. They ate in shifts. 12 at her kitchen table. The rest in the barn off paper, plates a woman named Sister Joe had pulled out of a saddlebag. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody cursed. The arm-wrestling lady, whose name was Donna, washed every dish by hand and dried them with a towel and put them away in the right cupboards on her first guess, which is something only a woman who has run a house for 40 years can do. Rooster sat across from Marin at the table when most of them had gone back to the barn to sleep. He asked her how long she had been alone. She said 2 years and 4 months. He asked if she had family. She said a sister in Tampa who called on holidays. He asked if she was all right on the place by herself. And that was when Marin Lockwood, who had not cried in front of another human being since the day they lowered her husband into the dirt, set her spoon down very carefully and started to cry. She told him about the bank. She told him about the second mortgage Tom had taken without telling her, to cover the vet bills the year the horses got sick. She told him about the missed payments after he died. She told him about the letter that came 2 weeks ago saying the property would be sold at the county courthouse steps in 11 days, and the foreclosure officer who would not return her calls, and the appraiser who walked her land last month without knocking on her door. Rooster did not say anything for a long time. He poured her a small glass of the bourbon. He pushed it across the table. He said very quietly that the storm would lift in the morning. He said his crew would be moving out at first light. He said he was going to need her permission to make a phone call before he left. She asked him what kind of phone call. He said the kind that ends with a lot of people coming to your county courthouse. She did not understand what he meant. She thought he meant lawyers. She thought he might know one. She nodded and said, "Yes, make your phone call." She finished the bourbon. She did not sleep well that night, but she slept, which was more than she had managed for a week. In the morning, the storm broke clean. The sun came up over a county turned white and silent. The bikes rolled out of her barn in pairs, engines warming, exhaust pluming in the cold. Rooster shook her hand on the porch. Donna hugged her hard. Sister Joe pressed a folded piece of paper into her palm and told her to call the number on it if anything went sideways before next Thursday. Then they were gone, a long black line of riders shrinking down the county road into the morning. Marin stood on the porch with the paper in her hand and the wind in her hair, and she thought, well, that happened. She thought it was a story to tell her sister at Christmas. She thought it was over. She put the paper in the kitchen drawer with the bills. She poured a cup of coffee. She sat down at the table where, 12 hours earlier, 12 strangers in leather had eaten her stew. The room felt larger now. The kind of larger a room gets after a house has been full. She did not yet know that 2 states away, a phone was already ringing in a roadside diner outside Knoxville, and another in a clubhouse outside Charlotte, and a third in a body shop outside Pittsburgh. She finished her coffee in peace. She put the cup in the sink. The phone in the hallway rang. She let it ring 4 times. She picked it up. It was the bank. The voice on the other end was a woman she had never spoken to before. The woman said the foreclosure date had been moved up. Not 11 days. 8 days. The woman said an investor had expressed interest in the property, and the bank wanted to accelerate the sale. The woman said she was very sorry. She did not sound sorry. She sounded like she was reading from a card. Marin asked who the investor was. The woman said she was not permitted to share that information. Marin asked if she could come into the branch and look at her file. The woman said the file had been forwarded to the legal department and was no longer available for review. Marin asked one more question. The woman said she had to go. The line clicked. Marin stood in the hallway holding a dead phone. She looked at the drawer in the kitchen, where Sister Joe's note was sitting under the unpaid bills. She walked over. She opened the drawer. She picked up the note. She read the number twice. She dialed. A man answered on the second ring. He did not say hello. He said her name. He said Rooster had told him she might call. He said his name was Hardy, and he was a lawyer in Asheville, 2 hours south. He said he had already pulled her county records that morning. He said she should not sign anything the bank put in front of her, not even a receipt. He said he was coming up that afternoon with a paralegal and a forensic accountant, and that she should put on a fresh pot of coffee. He said one more thing. He said the property had been appraised 3 times in the last year by 3 different people, and that 2 of those appraisals had not been ordered by the bank. He asked her if she knew that. She did not. He said, "That is the thread we are going to pull." The line went quiet. Outside, a single crow landed on the porch rail and looked at her through the kitchen window. Marin sat down at the table with the phone still in her hand. The room around her had gone very still. The kind of still you get right before a tree falls. She set the phone down. She got up. She put on a fresh pot of coffee. A truck door slammed in the driveway. She had not heard a truck pull in. The crow flew off the rail. Boots came up the porch steps and a fist banged the door, hard, 3 short knocks. Not the storm knock from the night before. A different kind. The kind that wants you to know it is the law. The county sheriff's deputy stood on her porch in a clean tan jacket. He was younger than her son would have been if she had had one. He held a clipboard. He did not take off his hat. He told her she had a notice to read. He told her there had been complaints about a quote-unquote large gathering of motorcycles on her property the previous night, and that the county was looking into possible code violations regarding unpermitted commercial use of a residential parcel. He said the county was also looking into a separate matter, a noise complaint, filed by a neighbor she did not have because her nearest neighbor was 4 miles away. He said if she wished to make a statement, she could come down to the courthouse before the hearing on Friday. He handed her the clipboard to sign. She did not sign. She said she needed to call her lawyer. The deputy's face changed. He had not been expecting her to have one. She told him to come back with a warrant or a court order or anything at all on paper, and to please get off her porch in the meantime. She closed the door. She locked it. She watched through the window as his truck backed out of the drive too fast and threw gravel against her mailbox. She walked back to the kitchen. The pot of coffee was finished. She poured a cup with hands that were not quite shaking. She thought about the 11 days that had become 8 days. She thought about an investor who had a name the bank would not say. She thought about a deputy who was already trying to build a paper trail against her before the foreclosure even hit. She thought about a woman named Sister Joe handing her a phone number on a porch in the snow. She thought very clearly that whatever was happening to her was bigger than her late husband's missed payments. She thought somebody wants this farm. And then she thought, well, let them try. If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. Now let me tell you what came next. Hardy the lawyer arrived at 2 in the afternoon in a beat-up Bronco with a young woman in a winter coat and a man with 3 laptops in a milk crate. They sat at her kitchen table for 4 hours. They spread her files across it. They pulled deeds from a county website on a hotspot. They pulled the 3 appraisals and laid them side by side. The first appraisal from the bank valued the property at $98,000. The second, from a private firm out of the county seat, valued it at $140,000. The third, from a firm in another state entirely, valued it at $480,000. Hardy tapped the third one. He said the third one was the real number, give or take. He said the bank had been writing down her property on its books for 2 years. He said somebody at the bank was getting ready to buy it at auction at a fraction of what it was worth and flip it to a developer who already had plans drawn up for a 40-lot subdivision called Lockwood Ridge Estates. He showed her the plans on his laptop. The driveway in the drawings was her driveway. The cul-de-sac was where her barn stood. The 2-acre retention pond in the drawings sat exactly where her husband had carved their initials into a hickory tree the summer they bought the place. 40 lots. Each lot priced in the upper 200s. He did the math out loud for her. He said the developer stood to clear close to $7 million on a property he was about to buy at auction for under $100,000. He let that number sit on the table for a moment. He did not push. He let her look at it. He said, the good news is, all of this is illegal in about 4 different ways. The bad news is, we have 8 days to prove it. He asked her to sign a $1 retainer. She signed. He told her he was filing an emergency motion in the morning. He told her he was also reaching out to the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Office. He told her one more thing. He told her that Rooster's chapter had voted that morning to underwrite her legal fees in full, and that 2 other chapters had matched the vote by lunchtime. He said she should not feel like a charity case. He said she should feel like the woman who had given them a barn in a blizzard, and that they were just paying her back the only way they knew how. She did not know what to say to that. So she made him a sandwich. He ate it. He left at 6. She locked the door behind him. She looked at the table where her whole life now sat in 3 stacks of paper. She turned out the kitchen light. 6 days later, the morning of the auction, a low rumble started on the horizon. It started before sunrise. Maren was already awake. She had been awake since 3. She heard it before she saw it. It came from the south first, a sound like distant thunder that did not stop. Then a second wave from the east. Then a third from the north, off the interstate. She walked out onto her porch in her husband's coat and watched the headlights string themselves along the county road like Christmas lights laid end to end. The line of them stretched back beyond the curve, where the road bent around the ridge and disappeared. She had never seen that many motorcycles in one place in her life. She would later read in the county paper that the official count was 512. They did not come up her drive. They had been told not to. They kept rolling in a long, slow column, straight past her gate and into town toward the courthouse, 10 miles down the road. They had been riding all night from 4 states. Some of them had ridden through a second storm to get there. The lead bike was Rooster's. Behind him rode Donna and Sister Joe, and the long red-haired man who had patched his glove with dental floss in her barn. Behind them rode every chapter within 700 miles, and a handful from further. Maren got in her truck. She followed them in. The county courthouse sat on a square in the middle of a town of 9,000 people. By the time Maren parked 2 blocks away, the square was full. The riders had lined their bikes along every curb in concentric rings around the building. They stood on the sidewalks in clean jackets, hands folded in front of them, not speaking. The local sheriff was on the courthouse steps with 6 deputies in a nervous line. The deputy from her porch was among them. He would not meet her eyes. Hardy met her at the courthouse door. He had a folder under his arm. He had not slept. He looked good anyway. He walked her past the deputies, into the foyer, into the auction room. The room was small. It had been built to hold maybe 40 people. There were already 100 inside. Half of them wore leather. The other half were neighbors from town who had come to see what the noise was about. The auctioneer stood at the front with a gavel in his hand and a man in a gray suit beside him. The man in the gray suit was the investor. He was a vice president at the bank, although he was not wearing a name tag that said so. Hardy had figured that out by Wednesday. The auctioneer called the room to order. He read the property description in a flat voice, the same flat voice he had used at 4 other foreclosure sales that morning. He noted the lien holder. He noted the parcel number. He noted the minimum bid. He did not look up from his page. He had done 1,000 of these in 1,000 small courthouses across 3 counties, and he had no reason to think this one would be any different. He started the bidding at $98,000, which was the bank's written-down value. The man in the gray suit raised his card. 98,000. The auctioneer asked for 100. A voice from the back of the room said 100,000. It was Rooster. The man in the gray suit turned around. He had not been expecting a second bidder. He raised his card again. 120. Rooster nodded at Donna. Donna said 150. The man in the gray suit raised his card faster. 160. From a different corner of the room, a different voice said 175. It was Sister Joe. The bids kept coming, from every corner, from people the man in the gray suit had not even noticed walking in. 200. 220. 250. He raised his card more slowly each time. His jaw was tight. At 290,000, which he said had opened an inquiry that morning at his request. He named the subdivision plans by name. Lockwood Ridge Estates. The man in the gray suit set down his card. He did not pick it up again. The auctioneer looked at the bailiff. The bailiff looked at the judge in the back of the room, who had wandered in to see what all the noise was about. The judge stood up. The judge said the auction was suspended pending review. The judge said he wanted everyone with a financial interest in the property in his chambers in 20 minutes. The room did not erupt. The room exhaled. The riders in the back did not cheer. They simply turned, all of them at once, and made an aisle. Marin walked down it. Hardy was beside her. Rooster fell in behind her. Donna behind him. The whole column moved through the door in silence, the way a tide moves. 20 minutes later, in chambers, the man in the gray suit was placed on administrative leave by his own bank's general counsel, who had been called by the state attorney general's office at 9:14 that morning. By noon, the foreclosure was withdrawn. By 2, a new mortgage at half the rate, underwritten by a credit union an hour south, was on the table. By 4, Marin had signed it. The property was hers, free of the bank that had tried to take it. Hardy explained, very gently, that the legal settlement against the bank for fraudulent appraisal would also, in time, pay off the new mortgage entirely. He said in time she would owe nobody. She did not understand. She said, why would they settle? He said, because if they did not, 512 people were prepared to sit on the courthouse lawn until they did. She walked outside. The square was still full. The afternoon sun was low and red. Somebody had set up a folding table on the courthouse steps with paper cups of coffee. Donna was pouring. Sister Joe handed her one. Rooster took off his sunglasses for the first time all day. He did not say anything. He just nodded at her, the same nod he had given her on her porch in the storm, the nod of a man who is trying not to show something on his face. She nodded back. She held the coffee cup with both hands. Her hands were warm. She had not realized until that moment how cold they had been for 2 years. The riders left at sundown. They did not take a parade route. They did not honk. They rolled out of the town square in pairs, the way they had rolled into her barn 6 days earlier, and the sound of them faded down the county road and over the ridge and into the dusk. The square emptied. The lights came on. The shopkeepers stood in their doorways and watched until the last red taillight was gone. A boy on a bicycle, 10 years old, sat at the curb with his mouth open the whole time and asked his mother who those people were. She told him they were neighbors. He asked from where. She said from everywhere. He said he wanted to be one when he grew up. Marin drove home alone. She pulled into her own driveway. She sat in the truck for a long time looking at her own barn. The big sliding door was still cracked open the way the riders had left it that first morning. Snow had blown in and lay in a thin white tongue on the dirt floor. She got out. She walked into the barn. She lit the wood stove. She sat down on a hay bale. The cast iron pot was washed and dried and back on the shelf where her grandmother had kept it. Somebody had stacked her wood pile higher than it had been in October. Somebody had fixed the latch on the tack room door. Somebody had left a small white envelope on the workbench with her name on it in careful printing. She opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small silver pin shaped like a wing. The paper was a deed of friendship, handwritten, signed by every chapter that had ridden to the courthouse. It said that for as long as she lived on the property, no member of any signing chapter would pass within 50 miles without checking on her. It said that the barn she had opened was the kind of barn a man rides a long way to find. It said her late husband would have been proud. She read it twice. She folded it. She put it in the pocket of his coat. She walked outside. The stars were sharp and clean above the ridge. Somewhere down the road, a single late bike rumbled by, slowed at her gate, lifted a gloved hand into the dark and rode on. She lifted hers back, even though she could not be sure he saw it. She stood there a long time. The barn behind her was warm again. The house was warm. The land was hers. The kitchen light was on. She thought about her husband. She thought about the funeral. She thought about the 2 years and 4 months of quiet. She thought about a frozen glove banging 3 times on her kitchen door. She turned around and walked back inside, and for the first time in a long time, the house did not feel empty when she closed the door.